Alright, in this video we're going to learn how to take the identities and use them to simplify trig expressions. Okay, and there's a couple main principles that I want to emphasize. Okay, the first one is that if you're ever in doubt about how to do something, the easiest thing to do is to change everything in the problem into something with sine and cosine. And what does that mean? Well, notice if you have a cosecant, you can change it into 1 over sine. If you have a secant, 1 over cosine. If you have a cotan, okay, cotan is 1 over tan, but remember tangent is equal to this. Tangent is sine over cosine, and that means cotan would be the reciprocal, would be cosine over sine. So basically what this means is every single one of these trig identities can be changed into something that has a sine or a cosine in it. Okay, the other thing to notice is if you ever see one of these Pythagorean identities showing up, use those whenever possible. Okay, so if you see something squared, like here there's something squared, we may or may not benefit from having that, but at least keep that in the back of your mind. And then the last thing is whenever you use something you can cancel, like there's something on the top that's the same as what's on the bottom, you would cancel that out. So let's apply this right now. So we want to start by when in doubt, and I'm looking at this right now, I'm a little bit in doubt, I'm not sure how to simplify it. When in doubt, change everything into sines and cosines. Okay, so we already have a sine there. Okay, so that's going to stay the same. And we already have a cosine squared on the bottom. But I want to change this one into sines and cosines. So notice that cosecant is the same thing as 1 over sine. Okay, then what can we do? Well, dividing by 1 over sine is like multiplying by sine over 1, by the reciprocal of that. So this thing is the same as times sine, because dividing by this becomes multiplying by this. Now we can say sine times sine is sine squared over cosine squared. What's another name for sine over cosine? That's another name for tangent. So sine squared over cosine squared, that would be equal to tangent squared. And that's as much as we can simplify. Usually when you're asked to simplify something, it means get it down to the point where there's just one term in it, like just tan squared, which is what we have right there. So I encourage you to try to pause it and see if you can simplify these other two. Okay, so number 2 and 3. So remember, the second principle up here says use Pythagorean identities or some variation of them when possible. So what does that or some variation of them mean? Well, here I see that I have a secant squared, and I know there's a Pythagorean identity. It's this one right here. I know there's a Pythagorean identity that has secant squared, but it's not quite like I want it to be. It's secant squared, it's not 1 minus secant squared. So let's see if we could rewrite this right here. I'm using x instead of theta. It doesn't matter what you use. Usually they use theta for angles, but we just use x. I want to write this so that I have 1 minus sec squared. So let me do that. Let me subtract 1 from both sides. So we'll have tan squared is equal to sec squared minus 1. That's almost what I want, except for I want it to be the opposite. So what I could do is just basically multiply by negative 1 right here. So if I multiply both of these by negative 1, I would have negative tan squared, and then negative 1 times that is positive 1. Negative 1 times this would be negative secant squared. So that means 1 minus sec squared, this right here, is the equivalent of negative tan squared. So let's replace it with negative tan squared, and then we still have that times cotan outside. Okay, now we're going to use another identity. So when in doubt, change everything into sines and cosines, and you might not have to do this if you notice something. Cotan is the same as 1 over tan. Cotan is the same as 1 over tan. So you could change everything to sines and cosines here, or I could say this. I could say this is like 1 over tangent, and then I'm multiplying it by negative tan squared of x. Well, then the last step on our 3-step process up here says, number 3, cancel whenever you can cancel. Okay, so what can we cancel here? Well, we have, if I were to write this as a fraction, this would be like over 1. I have a tangent here. I'll cancel a tangent, and I'll cancel one of those two tangents right there. If you're not sure why you can do that, imagine you have 1 over x times negative x squared. Well, in this case, you could cancel that x, and that becomes 1, and you can cancel one of those x's. That's all we're doing right here. So what are we left with? Well, we have 1 times negative tan, and then it's just over 1 times 1. So 1 times negative tan is just negative tan x. And now that has simplified, we have only one thing left in our simplified version. Alright, the last one we want to do here, let me clear that off. Last one we want to do is here, when in doubt, change everything to sines and cosines. This one is the same as 1 over sine times this one. Cotan is the reciprocal of tan. So tan is sine over cosine. that means cotan is the same as cosine over sine. And because cotan is being squared, I have to square both of these as well. And then this last one doesn't need to be changed into sines and cosines. It already is a sine, so we'll keep it as is. Okay, then we have to cancel whatever we can cancel. So this sine can cancel with that sine over there. So we're just left with this, and another name for that is cotan squared x. So we actually didn't really have to change that right there. So that's as simple as we can make it.